Namaste and welcome to this last session of day 2 of the Jaipur Dialogues 2020. And today we have a grand show on for you, and we have some very, very important guests. And let me introduce to you, first of all, Shri Rajiv Malhotra. I think you know him very well, and in many ways the person who set the Indic Renaissance on its course. And of course, Professor Subhash Kak is well known to all our Jaipur Dialogues viewers. He keeps coming to the channel quite often. Let me set the background for you today that we are talking about actually the motivation for this is the new book that Sri Rajiv Malhotra brought out, and it is called the Sanskrit Untranslatables. Sorry, the Sanskrit Non-Translatables, Sanskritizing the English language. And so actually I was wondering what kind of topic to keep based on that book. And so I thought that I'll keep it very simple. It will be just why Sanskrit. And that also brings to his, that also brings into context that his earlier book on Sanskrit, that was A Battle for Sanskrit. And before I request Sri Rajiv Malhotra to start with his talk, it will be about 10 minutes each for the two that present here, and we are expecting Koenraad Elst also to join while we are talking. And I also have to announce that this episode is very kindly sponsored by Shri Mani and Krishna Bhagavan Kandam. Thanks to them and welcome to all the viewers. And we go straight to Shri Rajiv Malhotra without any further ado. Shri Malhotra.
So, namaste, Sanjay. This is my first appearance on your wonderful Jaipur Dialogues. I remember we first met in Jaipur a long time ago. You were in the early stages, and I'm very glad that you've come a long way and wish you all the best for even more success. And I also want to greet my friend, long-term friend Subhash Kak. We've been old friends in many projects. Including his statement that he made regarding this book. So I'll tell you a little bit about the origin of this book. But first I want to say that the topic, why Sanskrit, has been discussed a lot. Everybody is discussing why it's an important language, it's logical, computational, it's our heritage, it's the mother of so many languages all over the world, and so on. I want to focus on how to take it forward. So I want to, from my side, I want to call it how Sanskrit rather than why Sanskrit. How do we do it rather than why we want to do it? I'm assuming that the audience already knows why we want to do this, but how we want to do this. So that's my first adaptation of the title. I'll focus on the how, because the non-translatables is a how you transmit to people who are otherwise English speaking. And then the second modification I want to make, or adaptation, is not Sanskrit but Sanskriti. So the knowledge of Sanskrit, the wisdom of Sanskrit, or the culture of Sanskrit, all the Sanskriti. So how we transmit the Sanskriti through the words of Sanskrit. Sanskrit as a channel of transmission of its knowledge. So it's the Shastra we want to transmit. It's the ideas, the metaphysics, the practices, all the meditations, all the tantras, all the practices that we do, the Vedic practices, agamas. We want to transmit all of that using Sanskrit as a medium of transmission. So there is, of course, Sanskrit being taught as a language for its own sake. There's perfectly wonderful, and it should be done. So people learn common things like how to ask for a glass of water, how to talk about the fan is on or not, or how to get a taxi, or I'm going shopping. These kind of simple talk, common talk, but that's not profound metaphysical Sanskriti per se. Though that's conversation that you could do in any language, and you might as well do it in Sanskrit or any language. My focus is the Sanskriti, which is very profound, which is very unique to our rishis. The rishis were the R&D labs who discovered the Sanskriti. And so to transmit this Sanskriti without distortion, without collapsing it, without reducing it, you need the Sanskrit as a delivery method. So the Sanskrit language is a delivery method to deliver something very profound, which is the Sanskriti. Sanskrit as a channel of distributing Sanskriti. So the Sanskrit is how this, it comes into how you deliver the Sanskriti. Yeah. The origin of this is very far back in my encounters with Western thinkers, Westernized thinkers. They're digesting. I have a theory of digestion, a theory of U-turns. And one of the standard things they are doing is, because they're translating words, I mean, they're turning this Atma into soul, then soon they're talking about the idea of soul, and it's not the same thing. So we've lost the discourse because now it's in their turf. They are the experts of that terminology. They know its history. They can argue with it based on it. And our Pandits and Shastras are either silent, they don't know how to talk about soul, or they buy into their idea, the other side's idea. The same thing happened when Jati and Varna became caste. We lost the discourse because we lost the vocabulary. So I tell my people, to discuss the caste system, the first thing you should tell people is, I don't want to talk about caste system. That's your language, your word. We don't recognize that word. It's nothing to do with our tradition. Our term is Jati and Varna. So I'm going to talk about Jati and Varna. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to quote you all the Shastra, tell you the history, but I'll talk about my vocabulary on my terms. Now, this is very important because Sanjay, as a legal mind, you know, half the battle is won if you get the jurisdiction on your side. If you are doing a contract between an Indian company and a Chinese company, the worst thing you can do is to accept Chinese jurisdiction for dispute resolution. If you say Chinese, all disputes will be resolved in the courts of Beijing, then you lost half the battle, because you don't know what's going on, who's in charge, who's the referee, how the law works. You know, you'll never be as good as them in their terminology. So this language and vocabulary is like jurisdiction in a debate. You have to have your terms of reference. So if you start introducing a few powerful Sanskrit words, make them part of your language, I call it Sanskritization of English. And the Sanskritization of English is not just for Indians and Hindus and Vedic people. I'm saying Sanskrit offers a rich vocabulary of ideas which are only expressible in Sanskrit. And therefore, these ideas should be part of the global discourse. So in a sense, when I say Sanskritization of English, we are kind of infiltrating, using these words. We are getting into the heart and soul and of mind of the psyche, you might say, of the Westerners. So they're what they call soul. We are infiltrating into the soul with the Atma. It is that kind of a thing. There are 20-30 million Americans doing yoga, and many of them are fascinated by, you know, what is asana, why is it different from position, and what is this word, what does it mean, and what is pran, why it's not breath. Nobody written a book. And so I want to target this book also for Westerners who are doing yoga and meditation and who are vegetarians and who believe in the feminine is divine, the divine feminine they believe in. So they believe in a lot of Vedic ideas, but they haven't put it together. And the gurus who put it together have done it on their terminology, not our terminology, and in a sense helped digest our tradition into their stomach. So we've basically been feeding, our gurus have been feeding our tradition into this other traditions for them to digest and eat it. And this has distorted us quite a bit. So I have big arguments with gurus also. I have arguments with so many gurus because while they're very popular and fashionable and all that, but they have not kept the integrity of the Sanskrit Non-Translatables the way I think it ought to be done. Now this, my book Being Different, which is a decade old now, has several chapters on what's different about our tradition. And it's almost like 5 books collapsed into one. Because there are 5 completely different ideas. The largest chapter is called Sanskrit Non-Translatables. So this is published a decade ago. The idea is much older that I have been developing, talking, creating trouble, going to conferences, Indology, and raising my hand and saying that word you translated wrong. You know, it's not the right word. And people just don't want to, like lingam. The translation of lingam has created so much mischief. Because you see what is the meaning of lingam in linguistics, what does it mean in so many different paribhashas, it has profound meanings. So to trivialize a word by translating it in a reductionist, in a collapsed way is very mischievous. So I started raising my hand at a time when we used to sponsor, we were the biggest sponsor of Indology. We had chairs in Harvard twice. We had University of Hawaii, 10 years of programs in Indian philosophy. We went to Columbia University. We had Princeton. We had so many universities we were funding. And I was monitoring and not afraid to question what they were doing, even though they were big shots. And so they said, we want Rajiv's money, but not Rajiv. He should stay out. We'll take his money happily. But the moment he gets involved, he's nitpicking. And I was nitpicking about these kind of things. And I'm glad I did it, because I built a whole theory of non-translatables, And then I realized that, there are Chinese people who don't want to translate certain Mandarin words. There are non-translatables in Arabic. There are non-translatables in French, in Russian. Many of these languages have brought loan words into English, and English has German words and French words and all that. So why can't it have Sanskrit words? I'm glad they have word like the yog, okay, but we should control its meaning. I'm glad that Max Miller did not translate it as exercise. Otherwise, we would have lost a lot, okay. But the word Shakti has been translated as energy. But energy is not divine, energy is not conscious, energy is not intelligent, electricity is just matter. So the divinity is lost when you collapse a word like Shakti as energy. We have so many gurus going around translating pranayama as sort of breathing exercise. And I tell them that if it's just breathing, which is mechanical, then this heart-lung machine, which is breathing machine, should be enlightened by now. It should have achieved moksha, because it's doing more breathing than any of us will do. And so this machine or a robot that you can make to breathe and all that ought to be like a guru by now, ought to be enlightened. And of course, they don't like hearing that. But the point that I'm making is that when you translate pran as breath and pranayam as breath exercise, you've actually lost the whole metaphysics. So with that, my 10 minutes is up, and I want to respect time. So I will turn back to you, Sanjay ji, to take this discussion forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your opening statement. Now we've got Koenraad Elst also. Welcome, Koenraad.
Yeah.
I think you got most of the namaste, and you got most of the statement that was
Yes.
given by Rajiv ji. And we'll just take in Subhash ji's views on taking Sanskrit into the Western forts, let's say. Okay, these are the Western forts, the language forts. And we want to take the language right there into that fort, as Rajiv ji said, that we are going to Sanskritize English. So what is your take on this?
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Wonderful to be a part of this conversation. And I really liked the points that Rajiv made. The very important ones, how Sanskrit is the basis of Sanskriti, or historically has been the basis of Sanskriti. And even if we use any other language, we must represent the fundamental concepts as honestly or as correctly as is possible, because otherwise we would be shortchanging Sanskriti. So that is the big challenge. Now, there are many other issues from my perspective, from my experience as a scientist and as someone who's also worked on history of other ideas in the Indian Vedic tradition as well as in the Western tradition. And the point that I want to make, that I want to begin with, is that one of the challenges is it's not just the Westerner who is perhaps misinterpreting some of the key concepts, which are a fundamental aspect of Sanskriti, but Indians themselves, and not just Indians who may have left India. And I think this is a point that Koenraad Elst made in one of his books many, many years ago, called, if I remember right, Decolonizing the Indian Mind, that a lot of Indians, and those who may not even be doing English or who may not even be using English as a medium, even somebody as big a titan of Hindi literature as Ramdhari Singh Dinkar. I remember reading his book just a few months ago, Sanskriti Ke Char Adhyay, and I realized that it was completely a Western take, a view of India through the Western lens. His representation in his famous book, because a lot of progressives in in the Hindi world like it, was giving interpretation of words such as jati and varna in the way that a Western anthropologist would use, or caste in a way that a Western anthropologist would use, and not necessarily the way these terms have been seen within India. So there are many challenges, and there are other challenges that I see. Last 2-3 years, I've been looking at literatures from Central Asia, especially Xinjiang and so on. And a lot of people don't know that for 1,000 years, until 1006 CE, Xinjiang was a part of the Sanskritic world, and a lot of their texts were written in Sanskrit. It may not have been traditional Orthodox Sanskrit. It's been by some historians called Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, but it was Sanskrit nevertheless. So the problem that I want to point to is that Sanskritists within India have sort of discarded or have looked at the vast world of Sanskrit beyond the borders in a kind of a stepmotherly way. So we need to go back and sort of embrace that, because these were some of them were original scholars like Kumarajiv and others, but there were other translators of texts, and many of them were translating Sanskrit texts into Chinese and Khotanese and other languages. So I think we need to also look into that, and first of all, understand the world of Sanskrit not only within the geographical limits of current day India or the Indian subcontinent, but the much larger range going all the way to Southeast Asia and further through China and Korea to Japan and lands of Central Asia. And then there are other intriguing concepts. For example, we do know that the Slavs, one of their biggest divinity was Shvetavid, the knower of whiteness, and whiteness here meaning light. Shvet here representing light, Shvetavid. So we find all these intriguing connections in literally pure Sanskrit terms, which are a part of the Slavic heritage, which need to be further investigated. So I think scholars need to devote attention to it. Now, the other point that I want to make is, in my work as a scientist, what has concerned me is that post-independence India has not produced as big or as great giants in modern science as pre-independent India did. Pre-independent India, we had J.C. Bose and R.C. Bose and Ramanujan and Meghnad Saha and many others who did fundamental work, who are considered giants. And we haven't done quite the same thing after independence. And the reason, in my view, is that prior to independence, Indians were still connected to Sanskrit's own tradition of science. For example, Vivekananda, when he came to the US and spoke to Nikola Tesla, he communicated ideas which are a part of Vaisheshik Sutras, which are a part of the Indian physics tradition. And so he told Nikola Tesla in 1898 that, hey, according to Vaisheshika, energy and mass should be interconvertible. So why don't you look into it? Now, and likewise, I was at the Bose Institute just a few months ago. J.C. Bose, great giant, he was conversant or knowledgeable about Indian sciences. So I think one of the things that we need to do, and this is part of Shastrik Sanskriti related to science, that needs to be reawakened. After independence, we literally separated the generations of students who have gone through Indian colleges and universities. So when I did my translation of Vaisheshik Sutras from a physics point of view 3 or 4 years ago and spoke about it in a conference back in India, Indian physics professors were astonished They had not even heard about it. And it's extremely exciting. And maybe we'll have some opportunity to discuss it further. So let me just stop here, and we'll, of course, pick up some of these threads further later on.
Okay, thank you, Subhashi. And now we come to Koenraad. Koenraad ji, well, you were one of the early proponents of the decolonization, and as Subhashi mentioned, the decolonization of the Hindu mind was one of your original works, and you also debunked the Aryan invasion theory. And one of the important facets that are involved in Aryan invasion theory is Sanskrit. How do you react to this idea of taking Sanskrit all the way back into the English language?
Well, the idea of non-translatability of Sanskrit terms, I am out of purist or perfectionist sentiments not entirely enthusiastic about, in the sense that some terms are indeed often wrongly translated, but could have been translated correctly. Like, for instance, to translate Atman as soul is obviously wrong, but the more usual translation, certainly in German, is the self. And that is a pretty exact translation of Atman, especially given the pre-philosophical meaning that Atman has within the Sanskrit language. You see, it means from yourself. It means yourself in the ordinary sense of I see myself in the mirror. See, in such context, you already use Atman, just as in English you use the word self. And so to elevate it to a philosophical concept can go parallel in English as it has been done in Sanskrit. So once in a while this works. Now, the experience has been tried before, namely with Chinese, because with the introduction of Buddhism in China, very many Sanskrit terms needed a Chinese translation. And here, of course, that example supports the case that Rajiv is making. Namely, the Chinese began by trying to find Chinese concepts as the answer to the Sanskrit concepts. And they found that it didn't work. Like, for instance, the word nirvana was at first translated as the Chinese concept Tao, Tao meaning the way. And so it has an established religious meaning. It's very old, it's also very vague. So in that sense, there's nothing wrong with using it for a translation of nirvana. At the same time, it is not really specific enough. And so this approach was abandoned. And instead what you got was a Chinese rendering of the Sanskrit sound. Like a very famous example that you all know is the word dhyana, meditation, which in Chinese became Chan, which you will know probably better under the Japanese form Zen. So Zen simply means dhyana, means meditation. And so that's the overwhelming tendency in Chinese to use these Sanskrit Buddhist concepts in a sort of Chinese rendering, but ultimately it is the Sanskrit word that is being rendered. There's no attempt at translation. Where there is translation, you see that usually it's not because they mean to translate that same word. I'll take an example from Sufism. A very central concept in Sufism is fana, which means annihilation. Now, the Sufis, of course, on the one hand, had this from Buddhism. At the same time, they needed to hide that it was from Buddhism. So they disowned its Buddhist origin, and they claimed an Arabic origin. They tried as much as possible to find this same word in the Quran, or so to claim falsely that it had a Quranic origin. But so when they did not use the Buddhist term, it was precisely because they wanted to hide the Buddhist origin. In Chinese, there are a few translations that have succeeded or that have stuck, that have stayed on, like the word dharma is originally translated as tamo, which is simply dharma, which, by the way, is the Chinese name of Bodhidharma, the Indian prince who went to China. But now the usual term is fa, which means the law. And so it is a translation of dharma in the sense of a system of regulations, the same sense in which dharma is used in the term dharma shastra. So a code of how exactly to behave. And so maybe that Chinese term does injustice to the richness of the meaning of dharma, but at any rate, that is one case where a translation has succeeded. So mostly no attempt at translation. But so it's just merely on principle out of perfectionism that I say, don't give in too quickly to this tendency. Sometimes with good intellectual effort, translations are possible. Well, let's continue from here. So this is my little contribution.
So I go right back to Rajiv ji. You heard Koenraad, and he has a different take. So I think you can. You may like to react to that.
Sure. So I disagree with Koenraad on several grounds. Sanskrit, there's 4 levels of word. There is the Vaikhari, which is the external, and you can say, okay, Atma becomes self and whatnot. Then there is the Madhyam, which is the internal representation, the internal sound. Then there is the Pashyanti, which is before it becomes even a thought, before it becomes a thought, and you haven't verbalized it. It's a preconceptual. And then there is the Para, which is a transcendent. Now, the theory of Sanskrit has to be understood on its own terms, not on terms of somebody else. That's itself a distortion. So if you start with a distorted idea of the philosophy of language, if you're starting with a Western idea of the philosophy of language, then of course Koenraad is right. But you have to understand philosophy of language as per Sanskrit language. So there are 4 levels of speech, 4 levels of vak. So the English word, no matter how accurate it may be at a conceptual level, there is no tradition to take you in vibrationally back to the source. There is no concept of this, the Shabd, the idea of a Shabd Brahman. There is no concept of mantra. There is no concept of mantra. In fact, T.S. Eliot wrote a lot about it. He was a tremendous Sanskrit scholar at Harvard, wrote a lot about it and criticized that one of the shortcomings of Sanskrit is that English is that there is no mantra. And he tried to invent some Sanskrit mantras and all. And those who want to learn more about it, there's a book by Cleo Kearns, her PhD dissertation, Cambridge University Press. It's called T.S. Eliot and Indic Traditions. Infinity Foundation published an Indian edition about it. I can get you copies of it. And that shows the absence of mantras troubled T.S. Eliot so much. So the mantric language is different from a conceptual language and a Vaikhari language. Even if you found a word and you said that it means the same thing, which I don't think Atma self captures all the nuances of Atman. It captures one nuance, it captures one aspect of it. But the relationship between Atman and Brahman, all the debates, those are lost when you talk about self. What it does is the adhikaris, the shastris, the people who capture who transmit our knowledge, who transmit our parampara, they are lost in this discussion on self. They are outsiders. They don't know what you are saying because it's not in terms that they are familiar with. It's like a lawyer, an Indian lawyer, having to go to China and fight a case on Chinese law under Chinese jurisdiction using their courts and jurisprudence. He would not know how to argue his case. He would be an alien. So it's a shame if our Pandits and our Shastris and our Acharyas feel that they are aliens in discussion about their own terminology. It's the other guy who should be a foreigner. The other guy, the foreigner, has to come and learn us, understand us. We have a very profound, older, longer, deeper tradition than they have. They have to rise up to us. If they can't, then too bad, they don't have to participate, but they can't bring us down for simplicity's sake on their terms, because they can relate to it better. So there is also a political implication. The political implication that, okay, we'll remove Atman from the vocabulary. In a few decades, there'll be no more use of Atman because we've replaced it with self. We've lost a lot. The future generation will not know what it means. I mean, already several Vedic Sanskrit words are lost because of this business. And so people don't know what it means. They are arguing, debating, because the continuity of interpretation is gone when there is nobody using them. So non-usage of a word atrophies it. Sanskrit becomes a museum. Only a few scholars will go to the museum and of languages and try to study Sanskrit. It will not be an active language. And Sanskrit is a language unique in that you invent from basic root words, you invent new words. So, Atman is not just a word, but Atman is a root of many, many Atma. There are many things you can add, prefix, suffix, keep doing it. Now, the question is, you'll have to turn English into a language which is derivative, where you can derive vocabulary. More words can be derived from original words. You'll have to Sanskritize English to the extent of, giving it this richness that, you can keep inventing words, and there's nothing wrong with just inventing new words. When the Westerners came and studied Sanskrit, discovered Sanskrit, they were amazed that this is a language which is generative language. And that is why it's so computer friendly and computational linguistic friendly, because it has this property that under Panini's Ashtadhyayi, you can actually, when you understand Sanskrit enough, it teaches you the rules for generating new words. And that is not true in English. So when you kill the Sanskrit by saying that the same thing can be said in English and we don't need it, you've lost the mantra effect of going back to the higher levels of Vak. You've lost the adhikar. Who is the adhikari and who is the outsider? Who is the insider and who is the outsider? The Westerners who know more about the history of their words and their language become the people in control of the discourse, and our Shastris and Acharyas become outsiders. And you've lost the ability to generate new words and carry this Sanskrit language as a living language with new kind of content coming out of it. So I don't agree that that deep words, even if you could argue that, okay, this particular word is like that particular word for all practical purposes, even if that were the case, I'm giving you the argument why we should preserve the Sanskrit language, to assert that it's our language. The whole history of that word, it has been used lakhs of times if you were to search one of those words. And we can't ignore all that history. We can't just get rid of it. And who's got the adhikar, how this word is used for meditation, how it's used in various nuances, for various practices, for various agamas, and how we carry it forward into the future. All of that we have to control and not lose this because we think that some other word is good enough. So that's my position. I'm pretty clear on this.
Okay. I move to Subhashji. Subhash, you heard two points of view.
Yes.
So
okay, wonderful. Now let's look. You see, we live in the global village. The Sanskrit world has to interface with the non-Sanskrit world. You have India, you have scholarship in Europe and America and elsewhere as well. So the whole question is, how do you negotiate a certain ontology that is associated with Sanskrit, a structure of reality, so to speak. And that's not quite the same as the structure which Western epistemology is based on. Because in at least Western scientific and even anthropological scholarship is based on the idea that there's nothing transcendent, and it's all about bodies and complexity and consciousness which emerges from bodies and so on, while the Indian view is radically different. In the Indian view, consciousness is fundamental, and therefore there's a lot of negotiation that's got to be done on that, because if people are doing Sanskrit in India, and there are some in India as well who might be materialists, who may reject the deeper para aspects associated with Sanskriti. And likewise, there are many people in the West, and especially a lot of quantum theorists who like the consciousness aspect of Sanskriti, and in fact, they've used that as one of the ideas in the explanation of their structures, their scientific structures. So what I want to say is that there can never be a single point of control, because Rajiv ji was saying is that who's going to control it? Even in the scientific community, for example, if you look at physics, there are 2 or 3 different schools of thought. There are those who interpret quantum mechanics, which is the deepest theory that there is, one way, and there are others who interpret it quite differently. So there will therefore be a continuing push and pull between different groups, and certainly those who believe in Sanskriti as has been traditionally accepted, and which is truly beautiful in so many different ways, including the Shastric aspects of it, which a lot of Indians themselves don't know. It's wonderful, but we cannot ignore other aspects of knowledge which have emerged in the West, which are wonderful too, which are beautiful too. And Sanskrit should also have the capacity to absorb it, because Sanskrit should not only be the vehicle of knowledge past, which is a part of Indian literary or Shastric tradition. It should also have the capacity to incorporate all the beautiful stuff that's emerged in other cultures and the West. And therefore, I see why Sanskrit, or how Sanskrit, as a continuing process where people need to be educated. For example, in one of the earlier dialogues with you, Sanjay ji, I spoke about this professor in a European university who said, we're not going to give a place at the Sanskrit table to Indian scholars, that we Westerners will decide what is to be viewed or interpreted in a specific way. Clearly, all that needs to go. That is a relic of the worst of the colonial period, and sadly it persists in Indology more than in other fields, because I can tell you that I found Western scholars wonderfully open. Perhaps the ones who are most resistant to change are in Indology departments, and that will change. So I think we've got to be positive and use Sanskrit also to incorporate new stuff. So Sanskrit should be a living language, and not just be a medium through which we can learn the great spiritual and other literary texts of India. And for that, what I've been arguing for several places in the past is that one of the big projects that India should embrace is translating world classics into Sanskrit. And doing so will also encourage translation of these world classics into other Indian languages. It's only when we embrace what is beautiful all over will we ourselves become be able to imbibe that energy that is universal, because ultimately Sanskrit is a vehicle of universal knowledge and universal insights.
Thank you, Subhash. That brings me back to Koenraad, and this is developing into a very interesting debate. Because
Sanjay, can I respond to Subhash?
Okay.
Because he said something I don't agree with.
Okay.
So a project that Infinity Foundation did with Arindam Chakravarti at University of Hawaii some 20 years ago was precisely to translate Hegel, Kant, Nietzsche, all kind of German and European thinkers into Sanskrit, and had him teach it to Sanskrit Pandits in Varanasi and in Tirupati. And the idea was, instead of us translating Sanskrit into English, what if we did the other way around? What if we took Western thought and represented it in Sanskrit and did a Purva Paksha in our terms about their thought? And he went and taught 2 summer schools, and that book we still have a copy of. His report was, he was doing this under Infinity Foundation grant at that time. His report was that the young Pandits who are Sanskrit trained are so brilliant in responding to every thought of Hegel and Kant and all these people. Once they were able to understand it in their own terms, they knew answers. they could come up with resources from our own philosophy, from our own darshan, and they could show that this argument this guy is giving has been made before, and here is its answer. And he says, I was amazed at how brilliant they were, and they were so happy that now they understand Western thought on our own terms, and we know how to give an answer. Now, this is why was it new? It was new because previously the translation had happened in the other direction. The translation had happened that Sanskrit was being translated into European languages. It was not that European thought was being translated into Sanskrit and enlightening our people. Had the Indians understood Islamic thought by understanding the Arabic in our terms and the Quran, maybe we would have understood what is their ideology and what they are up to. Had we understood British thought, had we understood Christian thought, done Purva Paksha on them, we would not be so naive and let them rule over us for 1200 years. One of the reasons we lost these battles is because we did not understand them in our own terms. We were happy to translate ourselves into their terms and have a dialogue in their language, in their terminology, which is not the same thing. So this was our experiment. It was a very powerful experiment. We did not have funding to continue, but I would really like somehow to revive this project of translating the best, latest, and the oldest Western thought into Sanskrit so that Sanskrit scholars can study it. Now, the way you make it living and assimilate is not by getting rid of Atma as a word. The way you do it is you try to study their term and say, okay, now how does soul fit into our framework? How does their idea of soul fit into our framework? Is there a philosopher who said something similar as they are claiming metaphysically? Is it something new? And you know, the elasticity of Sanskrit is huge. The context in which Sanskrit has expanded is so huge. So I wouldn't say that Sanskrit is about controlling the thought. Sanskrit has a bigger diversity of opinions, disagreements, dissenting voices, debates and negotiations than any old, say, if you look at classical Greek, Latin, they do not have that wide a spectrum of arguments as you will find that Sanskrit has. So I wouldn't dismiss Sanskrit on grounds that because we need to negotiate, we need to be open, we need to not be fixed, and we need to be assimilative, therefore it's a negative for Sanskrit. I think it's the other way around. Sanskrit actually is more assimilative. It's a better motherboard, if you will. It's a better architecture in which to, a soil in which to bring in these other languages and their thoughts. So if you were to take the goals that Subhash has, those goals are better served with bringing the other language, other words into Sanskrit, and the debates and negotiations in Sanskrit, because it is a much richer language. And as far as negotiation is concerned, yes, we need a counter voice. We are not saying that it should be just X and not Y, but right now it's the other way around, 100%. The discussion is all the Sanskrit discussions, including this one, happening in English. The international conference on Sanskrit, I've attended these twice. I've attended in Bangkok. It's all in English. The one in Toronto, Montreal, all over the world, these conferences are in English. So the issue is not that we are overdoing it. We need to balance it out. If you can have a negotiation, you need people on both sides who are empowered, who feel empowered, who will stand up, stick their neck out, take a risk, and argue. And so I just want to put 54 words. It's not like I'm taking over the whole world. I just want that the Aam Aadmi should be able to take 5 words, 10 words, 20 words, whatever they feel like, and add it into their English vocabulary, whatever words they want, and be able to explain why they're using this and how it's different and what its meaning is. We are not invading, and we are not Sanskritizing English. Does not mean you stop saying self. It does. You say Atman and explain Atman. It does not mean that you end the word caste. Caste is in the American culture also. American society has its own caste system. But you introduce another word. You don't eliminate any word of that English already has. You add new words, enrich the English language. So by expanding knowledge with more ideas, you are not harming anybody. You are expanding the negotiation by adding more people at the table. I'm not saying that the Western Indologists should be thrown out. They also have a voice, and I'm happy with it. But we need to bring our Pandits and our Acharyas at the Indology table, and they should be able to speak in their own terms. So that's my point.
Okay. That's taken care of both the arguments from Koenraad as well as Subhash. So now I go right back to Koenraad. Sir, you heard Rajiv, especially regard with what you said. Okay, the Atman can be translated as self, And my point on this, I'll just add a little bit of my point, because when I was trying to understand the Vak parameters and trying to look at the various levels of Vak, we find that even we talk of self, then Chit and Chit, even they are different. One is at one level, the Chit has it at another level. So how do you negotiate with these fine distinctions that can be understood only in Sanskrit? And uh, if you really try and put it in self, then you probably have to have a universal self, and you have to have a self or something like that. So I think what Rajiv ji is saying, and what Subhash ji seems to be agreeing with, seems to make a lot more sense. What's your take on this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Reggie may say that he doesn't agree with me. Now, this is about minor points, because I'd say on my part that very largely I'm in agreement with the thesis he develops in his latest book, and which he has just now developed. It's just that when there's a good thesis, I prefer to not let it go without a devil's advocate, a shaitan ka wakil, who tries to still find fault with it. But no, on the whole, it's quite correct. And like you see it in the yoga world, for instance, you have people who meticulously keep all the Sanskrit terminology, try to imitate the Indian gurus doing their rituals and so on. And then you have people who try to smother and hide that Sanskrit origin. Like you have in America, you have Christian yoga, where they use new terminology, English terminology, downward dog pose and so on, to obscure the Sanskrit origins and even deny them. And so you have a now quite influential book by James Mallinson about the origins of yoga, where it is said explicitly that in its origin, yoga is not Hindu, and where they really try to divorce it as much as possible from its Hindu roots. So it's very important to go against that. Now, it's a big job. And here we're only talking about a fairly academic work. You see how philosophers, linguists deal with Sanskrit. It's in a way a breath of fresh air, in the sense that it's very realistic. Let's talk about this, which is really an issue that many people understand, and that many of the people concerned, the Western Indologists, for instance, once in a while have to deal with and take a position on. Whereas last time that I heard Rajiv talk about Sanskrit, it was about a far more ambitious topic, which I can't help caring about, because I think it's very important for India's future, namely to introduce Sanskrit as the official language, as the unity language of India. And so, these fine points are very interesting, but what I think is of far more immediate importance is where we are going with the language question in India politically, because that determines the life chances of Sanskrit in the future. What is happening today is that the Sanskrit language, but the Hindu Sanskriti as a whole, is getting forgotten. And the new generations know less and less and less about it. And as a proverb says, unknown makes unloved. And that is happening more and more. When you see the Hindu popular agitation for the Ayodhya temple, for example, 30 years ago, you really have to wonder whether this is still possible today, because people are getting so estranged from their own native culture. And so this is particularly true at a linguistic level. This new educational policy has been applauded by lovers of vernacular languages because they increase a little bit the importance of the vernaculars, right? Just as in lay society, you've had a certain growth of the vernacular press vis-a-vis the English press. But nevertheless, that doesn't change the basic fact that the position of English as the language for anything serious is getting stronger and stronger and is reaching more and more people. And you see, a number of Hindu gurus, for example, have told me that they speak in Kannada, in Tamil, whatever, for an older public. For younger people, they always use English because these people don't take anything serious unless it is in English. So their vernaculars, they associate it with what the cleaning lady speaks. And so in Sanskrit, this is a bit different because of the status of Sanskrit. Nevertheless, you are creating a society where Sanskrit is at most a museum piece. And so, you see, that's why I tend to focus more on this political issue, whether to choose Sanskrit or not. And at the moment, it is just not happening. You see, in the time of the Constituent Assembly, everybody agreed, 100% of the people who were there to vote, everybody agreed that India's link language should not be English. And so 50-50 voted for Hindi or for Sanskrit, and Hindi won, which I think is a great pity because Hindi in its role of national language is not really viable. Too many groups object to it. And whereas Sanskrit, being a difficult language, but difficult for everybody and foreign to everybody, had a fighting chance. If it had been accepted in 1949 as India's link language, the whole world would have applauded it. You see, East Asia because of the Buddhist reason, the West because of the Indo-European reason, all the decolonizing countries would have greatly applauded it because it would be proof that the native culture, in this case the native language, is perfectly good enough. You see, is not something to look down on as the colonizers did. It's a reaffirmation of India's own identity. So at that time, Sanskrit had a very good chance. Even Ambedkar was in favor of it. Even some Muslim leader was in favor of it. So back then it could happen. Today, because of the very firm position of the Christians, of the Muslims, of the Ambedkarites, and of a very large and ever larger block of born Hindus who are Americanized, secularized. Now it is becoming very, very, very difficult. That's no reason to give up. It's just a realistic assessment of the situation where we are. So compared to facing this rather troubling fact, it's a bit of a breath of fresh air to go back and discuss these scholarly aspects about Sanskrit.
Thank you, Koenraad. So I think there's now, at least on the initial proposition by Rajiv ji, there seems to be now an all-round agreement, and there is a slight variation that's been introduced by Koenraad ji, and that is the political question. And I think we discussed, we means I and Subhash ji in one of the talks that we had, that one of the things that needs to be done is to make Sanskrit fashionable. And how to make it fashionable? I think to make it fashionable, if a lot of words do get introduced into the English language, as Rajiv ji calls Sanskritizing the English, I think that would be one step towards making Sanskrit fashionable. What do you say, Subhash ji, of that?
Well, I agree with Koenraad. Indian languages and Sanskrit also are losing to English. English has become so dominant. Even in the Hindi press, I had the experience 2 or 3 times in the last couple of months when this Hindi newspaper wanted to translate one of my or a few of my English essays into Hindi behind the paywall. And so I said, well, you can do it for free. But then they sent me the first drafts of their translations. I can't tell you how bad they were. They were half the vocabulary was English. The translators, even those who write for Hindi newspapers and Hindi magazines, are not connected in a vital way to knowledge being created and regenerated, which needs to be done for any living language with every generation. And I want to quickly address one point that Rajiv made. It's not about philosophy or philosophical discussion. It's about all the other subjects, Adam Smith and anthropology, sociology, and even physics and so on. They need to find a place in Sanskrit and well, let alone Sanskrit. They're not being properly nursed in in the Indian languages themselves. So how to make it fashionable, I think is going to be a big challenge. Certainly what Sanskrit Bharati has done at a very elementary level to make it possible for people to do elementary conversational communication with each other in Sanskrit is a laudable thing. But to go beyond it, I think it needed something more fundamental, like what Koenraad mentioned. Had there been a decision at that time, I don't know whether it can be done now. If it can't be done now, can it ever be done in the future? We don't know. A lot has to change. There has to be a lot of energy, first of all, because ultimately it's the energy which wins out. And Hindi or Indian languages, well, just imagine, you're talking about fashionable. When Hindi movie stars speak about their movies, they speak in English. When you have these big award nights, all the Hindi movie stars who step up to the podium speak in English. Just imagine, would this happen in any other language? In ways which are unimaginable, perhaps. India is one nation, and possibly there are the African nations who also are struggling with colonial languages. India is one nation which is a unique situation. We don't have the same thing in Southeast Asia or Indonesia or Iran or Arabian countries. They have their own languages. India is one country where we have lost our language and which has really made us weak. This is another point that has come up in the past. Indians are taught programming only after they have learned English, and which is why India's total effectiveness in the computer world is a fraction of what it ought to be. India bats at the same level as maybe Hungary or maybe Czechoslovakia. And it's because Indian policy makers have decided that no, because they have this great inferiority complex in relation to English, they think, because they don't know, because they're only professional policymakers, they think that, well, programming is a kind of a takeoff on English, on a Western language. This programming should be taught in every Indian language. It's taught in Korean, in Vietnamese, in Chinese, in Japanese, and so on. We haven't taken these fundamental decisions. Sanskrit will not be fashionable until great major change is made in the way we approach the whole question, and we use common sense and less of cute thought. I think it is Bertrand Russell said it sometime in his autobiography. He says, sometimes bizarre theories are believed to by brilliant people much more readily than by, I'm paraphrasing, than by ordinary people. I think that's the problem with India, that our thinkers in Delhi or in Jaipur and elsewhere are not using common sense, whereas Southeast Asia and East Asian leaders in technology and sciences and education have used common sense, and that's why they've been much more effective in dealing with their problems than we have been.
Okay, but before I take it to Rajiv for the last word, I just clarify a little bit what I mean by fashionable. This on this Jaipur Dialogues forum only. I interviewed Vijay Lakshmi ji, who happens to live in Florida, and while she was working in the US, she decided to take both her children back to Chennai and teach them the Gurukulam way. And today, both of them are in Ivy League University in the US at the top of their classes. So those are the kind of examples that make things fashionable exactly in the manner of cricket. And the cricket used to be one of the games. And because I come from, I also happen to be a sports administrator in cricket. So I've seen how that game grew, and it grew on the strength of a couple of stars. Sunil Gavaskar, Kapil Dev, Sachin Tendulkar. You can have just a handful of stars on that 83 World Cup victory. And wow, I mean, vroom, the cricket suddenly from being one of the games became the game. So when I say make it fashionable, I think we need to project these kind of stars who have done through Sanskrit and yoga. I wrote one tweet one day, that, okay, you want to really make your child a genius, then teach Sanskrit and yoga to him or her right from the beginning. Oh my God, that tweet, I think it did something like 10,000 RTs with no time. So that does show that there is an inkling, but we need to showcase our stars. Rajiv ji, your last word.
So I think we've had some very interesting views. I want to say that not only is English winning as a language, and it will continue winning because of jobs and power and the legal frameworks and all the networks and so on. Not only is that going to be the case, but what is happening is Hindi is getting anglicized. A lot of the Hindi signs you see, they are written in Devanagari, but the word is English. They're speaking, they're actually, if you were to speak what they are saying, you are speaking Angrezi Bhasha, but you are writing in Devanagari, and this is a very common thing. So the Hindi I was taught was Urduized as a Delhi wala. We taught Urduized Hindi. So Hindi has actually brought in a whole lot of Urdu words, Persian words, Turkish words, like Watan. I found out Watan when I went to Turkey. And there's this Watan Bank and Watan Street, and they said Watan means nation. And so hum apne ye mere Watan ke logo, like Lata Mangeshkar, this is a Turkish word. So we have brought from the invaders' influence, we brought Turkish, Persian, Arabic words, British words, and so on, English words. So this business of introducing 54 words into English that are Sanskrit why should it be such a big scandal and a hassle and a controversy? We should be very proud of it. We were imported hundreds of words from all these languages. We've done more than enough assimilation and all that. We should not have inferiority complex that we need to be assimilative. We are very assimilative people. We need to now hold our own. The balance has tilted too much in one side. We need to stay firm, dig in our heels and say, okay, certain words we don't want you to translate because they lead to bad consequences, like varna, jati, like lingam, these kind of words. So we are starting a little bit. I also want to say that a word is not in isolation in Sanskrit. It is part of a network of meanings. The words refer to each other, and it's like an ecosystem. So you cannot pluck out a word like Atma or some word and just replace it with something else, because you've destroyed the balance of that whole ecosystem of interdependent words, like a network is, usually. And I also want to say that we are not the only ones making this position. Arabs want to Arabize, they want to introduce certain Arab words. They'll tell you in scholarly conferences that this word has no meaning anywhere else. It's our word. Chinese are very clear on that. There are certain words that they, in China, the study of international cultures and all that is done in Mandarin. China studies, unlike Indology, which is in English, all the journals, even in India, the China studies is in Mandarin. The best journals are in Mandarin. So a hurdle is that if you want to study them, you got to submit to them, their authority. They are the guru. They'll teach you, and they'll judge whether you know enough or not to be publishable. So everybody, all the American guys here in Princeton University who are into China studies, they're always saying, hey, I got to improve my Mandarin. I got to be understanding the nuance of their thought and understand them in a way that they'll certify me. So who gets to certify the discourse is power. And so this has a lot to do with what's the vocabulary we're using. It's not a simple matter of a few simple issues. This is a very well thought out issue, well thought out problem that we have to deal with. Finally, what I'll say is that what we should have done is not relevant. What we can do now. So there has to be a pragmatism. What can we do now? So at the government level, I would say the NEP failed to do justice to Sanskrit. I mean, this is not enough for Sanskrit. So what do we do as common people? So I'm looking at it as a pragmatic thing that does not depend on any sarkar, any government, any Indologist, any, reversing the clock and going back in time. It should have been this or that. I'm saying what we common people can do is to Sanskritize our vocabulary, whatever words you can. We have 54 words and it's half of 108. So we want to do 108 words. We'll have a second volume. Then we're going to have conferences actually starting next year, where we'll also talk about non-translatables in paribhashas, in domains, subject matter domains. So there is Sanskrit non-translatables in Ayurveda, in Ganit Shastra, in dance, in yoga. So there are Sanskrit non-translatables in various specialized subjects. Okay, so we want to start having conferences where we'll bring in experts from those fields to explain to the audience what are the 5, 10, whatever number of examples they can come up with of Sanskrit non-translatables in their particular subject matter. And then we want to publish all that. We want to make videos all that. And maybe Jaipur Dialogues will help us and collaborate with us to spread this knowledge. We can all work together on this. You guys are great scholars and you can help us. It's a common cause. So we're saying, here is something the Aam Aadmi, little fellow like me with no clout or no recognition, no official anything, we can start this. And if each of us says that I will Sanskritize the language to whatever extent I can, I will become an ambassador of my culture. I'll become an ambassador of my culture in every living room, in every party that's going on. If somebody talks, I can correct them a little bit and say, okay, I don't know what caste system, what you're talking about. I'll talk about Varna. It actually creates a big sensation. People never heard of this before, many people. And so you can start a conversation, provided you know what to say, provided you have done your homework. So this book is to give people that homework, 5 pages for a word, and a 10-minute video dialogue between the two authors. That's all it takes. So if you can watch a 10-minute documentary once a week and read 5 pages on what this word is, you'll have introduced one word into your vocabulary. In a year, you'll have added 54 words and you'll have Sanskritized your English. It's not a big deal to ask people to do this. If they say, what can I do? I get a whole lot of people calling me and writing to me saying, I'm not a big shot, I have no authority, I don't have any money, what can I do? Well, here is something you can do. You start, and in a year, if you don't have 54, you have 10, 20, whatever you have, better off than now. Start Sanskritizing. I would predict that within a few years, we'll reach 1 lakh people who will say, I have Sanskritized my English to some extent. I believe that this will then be a snowball effect, and the fashion that you're talking about will start when people like us start Sanskritizing our English. Thank you.
All right. So now what we'll do is that we've got a lot of questions for all the panelists. So we will pause now and start taking the questions from the audience. So another 10 minutes, 15 minutes of these question and answer session.
Before that, can I just provide a little tidbit on the word Vatan that Rajiv mentioned? When you go back to the earliest Khotanese texts, the word for their own land is Swatam, which is a Sanskrit word. And in fact, just as you have Desi or Deshi for one's own language, the Khotanese language for Khotanese was called Hawatanai. Instead of Sir, it became H, Hawatanai. So the word Vatan, if you go back and you can check this, you can look at the hybrid Sanskrit texts and so on. From Khotan, the word Vatan most likely is derived from Swatan. and from Central Asia it went to Turkey, because as you know, the Turks went through Central Asia to Asia Minor. So what an interesting past.
Okay, that's an interesting one. You're muted.
We introduce Swatan as our word. If we introduce Swatan as a word, we should be teaching the Turks that your Vatan is actually Swatan. So that's what the language is about. In fact, many words in English etymologically originated from Sanskrit. So when we Sanskritize English, we have to also reclaim those words. Similarly for Turkish. Thank you.
Okay, so we move to the question and answer round now.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Okay, starting question and answer round now. The viewers, please do share, subscribe, and like the video, and press your bell icon, and keep your support going. Thank you very much. And Sandeep Guntur is the first question. Thank you all the panelists for the enlightening discussion on Sanskrit. Please comment. The same shloka can be split in different ways according to the interpreter, and different meanings come out. So, Rajiv ji, you'll take that question?
Say it again. I was a bit distracted. Yeah.
So can the same shloka be split in different ways according to the interpreter, and can different meanings come out of that?
Yeah, I mean, Sanskrit is a vibrational language, and there has been a debate. The word Atma we talked about today has been debated a lot. The idea of what is Atma, is there an Atma, Anatma, no Atma, its relationship with Brahman is debated. So the same word, of course, when you talk about a full shloka, it's even more complex, more interpretations. The idea of interpretation goes back to Subhash saying that we need to be not stuck on one thing, control, but we need to have diversity and negotiations. And so Sanskrit allows that. I would say that we are not giving a rigid one interpretation only. We have many schools of thought. We are not giving one interpretation only, but we are using our framework, our language framework, for all the interpretations to come and argue. So the discussion table is a Sanskritized discussion table. That's my idea. It is not an anglicized or an Arabic or Urdu discussion table where we are outsiders. It is our discussion table, and on this Sanskritized discussion table, all views are welcome. All interpretations are welcome, and that has been the tradition. You take so many views on the same Upanishads, so many schools of Vedanta have emerged. So it is not that Sanskritizing means that you come up with a homogeneous interpretation. No, certainly not.
Okay, that's right. Okay, the next one. Ajay Sharma, any workable solutions for making Sanskrit a living language once again? Not just a language that is taught in schools without children understanding it and just mugging it to get marks. So Subhash ji, you can take this question.
Well, it's got to be a people's movement. I think one can look at how the Israelis did it when they revived Hebrew in Israel. So energy has to get into it, and now we have technology that can facilitate this process. As has been brought up here before, more books, popular books, into Sanskrit. How did I learn English? I studied in small villages in Kashmir. I learned English on my own by reading books. And likewise, if there was a lot of wonderful stuff, novels and other stuff available, teenage material to people, to young people, learning Sanskrit will become easier. So it's got to be a people's movement.
Okay, right. Next question. Dr. Deepak Guru, Shri Rajiv ji, please tell us how we get most of the people in India and abroad to meditate, which is the ultimate aim of our Sanskrit. I think we lost you briefly. This question is to you, Rajiv ji.
Yes. Yeah, tell me. I'm sorry, I lost. Yeah, I lost. Something happened.
Please tell us how we get most of the people in India and abroad to meditate.
So I think you need a guru. I learned meditation from different gurus, many systems, but I do my transcendental meditation for the last almost 50 years now. And on top of that, I've learned many other systems. I've learned Sri Sri's system. I've learned Tantra from various gurus. So I would say that this is not something I want to teach or feel qualified to teach. I've decided I don't want to get into the guru because it's a huge responsibility and so on. Although I've been certified, I will tell you, I've been certified as a teacher in various lineages. And so, but I did it just to get more knowledge for myself, not to turn it into a career. I think you need to go to a proper guru. Meditation in a kind of a secularized way for relaxation, which they do, is okay for some level. But the actual transmission, should be done by a guru, and you should look out for a guru. You should go and meet a few gurus, check them out, talk to them, see who you relate to, and join their movement, join their classes. And then finally, when you are really sure, then you go and get initiated. That is the right way to learn meditation. It is effort, but this effort will pay off, I can tell you for sure.
Okay, next one. Lalit Ambardar. Okay. Yeah, I think a lot of us would know Lalit. Why West does not include East Europe and Indologists there? Any research on interface of Sanskrit with Russian in terms of civilizational links? Example, word for fire is common in Sanskrit and Russian. So, Koenraad?
Yes. Well, I think Eastern Europe is more and more being included. It used to be a separate sphere during the Cold War. But Russia, at any rate, has had a big Orientalist tradition since the 19th century, especially St. Petersburg. There's a big Tibetan temple there that has existed all through the checkered history of St. Petersburg. And it has a grand Orientalist museum, devoted to all the different Orientalist activities there. Today, in fact, 2 Russians have joined us in defending the out of India theory, and are contributing precisely from their own different background new arguments to the case against the Aryan invasion. So I mean, otherwise it's one big continuum. Also in the negative sense, in the sense that in Russia too they had the same condescending attitude to India to quite an extent once that became popular. Not in the beginning of the 19th century, but towards the end of the 19th century, when India descended to the status of a colony, you see that in parallel, the estimation for India is going down, down, down. And so that affects Russia as much as the rest of the world. As for these words that are cognate, well, you see that counts for most European languages. Either they are cognate to Sanskrit, German is, French is, and so on. Most of them are. Or in the case of Hungarian and Finnish, they have plenty of Sanskrit loanwords. Like, for instance, sas in Hungarian means 100. It's Sanskrit shata. And so you see the whole world has a connection to Sanskrit. But in the case of Europe, it also has this linguistic connection that it is that their languages are related to Sanskrit. So that's one angle to help popularize the study of Sanskrit in Europe. And in fact, that is happening. I mean, I see that in all those, Facebook groups or more serious forums that this etymological connection is used all the time.
Okay, we have 2 more questions to come. So let's have the last but one. Rajiv ji Pranam. We know modern inventions are stolen from Vedas. How to make this unapologetically mainstream? There are many examples how to do it.
So, we're doing our best. We started this History of Indian Science and Technology, which we have 14 volumes published. They're available in print. And we just launched a couple of days ago the 12 of them in Kindle, so that we don't have to have printer cost. It was costing $50 to ship it overseas with a hard copy. So started this in 2000, and this was inspired by Joseph Needham, who did 30 volumes on China's history of science and technology. And some Chinese scholars told me that this is why China became so important as a knowledge center, because of this Joseph Needham series. And nobody had done this for India, so we decided to do this. Now, my vision was that we first start with material matter. So we start with iron, steel, shipbuilding, cotton, agriculture, these kind of things, and Harappa and all those places, Dholavira. We've done all of that. And Jagatpal Joshi, who was the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, nobody more senior than that comes, he wrote the first volume, and he was on the editorial board. So we did that. And we wanted the next one to be life sciences, then a series of 20, 30, then to be mathematical sciences, then we wanted to be philosophy. So we wanted to do 108 volumes, and we ran out of support. We went to the government. We went to Murli Manohar Joshi when he was the education minister. He was very fond of it, loved it, but nothing happened. We went to Kapil Sibal when he was a minister. We went to the IIT people, but everybody loves it, talks about it, but nobody actually supported us. We've even gone to the latest science minister, but it's nice talk, but ultimately they turn us over to the administrators, IAS people, and they don't do anything. So we've done this, but I will say the following: Sanskrit. The other idea of knowledge systems is I'm actually developing a very large volume set of my own writings. This is not about sponsoring other scholars, because that takes money. If I'm doing it myself, I don't charge any money, so it's free. So I have been working on 20 volumes at least, which will be on Indian influences on Western thought. So I've just finished one on Kant. I'm going to do one on Hegel. So I'm doing, each of them is about 150 pages. So I'm doing German thinkers, French thinkers, English thinkers, Neoplatonic people going way back. Then I'm looking at modern cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology. I'm looking at that. I have a four volume, total 1,000 pages. I'm looking for an editor. If somebody is interested, please tell me. I'm looking for a good qualified editor. We have 4 volumes on Indian influences on modern Christianity. And this is Christian theologians. This is correspondence within the church. This is not sort of chauvinism or outside kind of a thing as an outsider view. I'm only quoting Christian theologians. I'm quoting Christian theologians' own writings about Indian thought, Vedic thought, Buddhist thought, and what they are saying, how they're arguing with each other. So these are 4 volumes where I want to finish the editing if somebody can help me, because with eyes and all problem, I can only work so fast. I used to work much more, but I don't want this work to go waste. I want to do 20 volumes, and I'm going to do it in the next 3-4 years. We'll get them out on different areas of Indian knowledge influence on the West. Philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science, mind sciences, Christianity, etc., etc. So just wait. I mean, I don't want to wait for somebody else to do it. Wait, we are going to do it. We take the full responsibility. We started on this project, and we are going to deliver. So in 2021, I will start introducing these things out. I will bring them out. Thank you for asking the question.
Okay, okay. So today's last question. Great respect to all. Urdu has become fashionable very fast to younger generation due to Bollywood movies and songs. Current approach, Rajiv ji mentioned, would take Sanskrit decades to be fashionable. Thoughts about this?
So
Rajiv ji.
I think that it's fashionable. Let me tell you this. During Raj Kapoor's time, it was a very Hindu Bollywood. I just watched some old Raj Kapoor movies a few days ago. Raj Kapoor's time, it was cool to be Indian, Hindu, very patriotic. There was no secular kind of thing over his head, So in the last 2 generations, even the Kapoor family, his descendants and many others got digested into some pseudo-secularism and Islamization and all that. And one can debate that. But Bollywood got Urduized and secularized and turned into a left and Hindu-phobic rather recently in the last few decades. It's not an old thing. This is the result of many factors: who's funding it, the Dawood family, and the mafias and all that. So I think the taking back Bollywood and back into our Sanskriti can be done. Right now, it's not just language, but when they're showing a villain, he's got a tilak. And we're showing a nice guy, he's going to save everybody, he's some father or some imam or somebody, very sweet and nice. There's a lot on the social media. a lot of this kind of discussion is being exposed in the social media, which I'm very glad a lot of people are joining into this and pointing this out. But we need some big guns, people with big, deep pockets, big funding, to take over some of these production studios and develop things which are pro-Vedic in the narrative and in the language, and make it aesthetic. You have to hire good actors, good-looking people, and you have to, then it becomes fashionable, because whatever is cool, and that has to be, money can also manipulate that. What is cool and what is fashionable is also a matter of manipulation. It is not something that it's a lost cause. I do not believe that Bollywood has been lost permanently. I believe it can be reversed, but you need some heavy hitters to take this up.
So that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much, Rajivji. It was most enlightening, and I'm sure the people who have watched it, a lot of people were watching it concurrently. They would all be encouraged to at least start adapting the 54 words that you have prescribed. Thank you, Koenraad-ji. Thank you, Subhash-ji. Wonderful having you all here. Once again, to mention that this episode was sponsored by Srimani and Krishna Bhagwan Gandham. Thank you to them. Thank you to all the viewers. Once again, Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
Thank you. Thank you.